The journey seemed endless. For days and nights, Sacagawea and the other captives were forced to walk across the wide, unforgiving plains. The sun blazed above them, and the ground beneath their feet burned like fire. Each step felt heavier than the last, yet there was no pause, no mercy. Dust filled their mouths and eyes, clinging to their skin until they no longer looked like children of the Shoshone, but shadows of the wilderness itself. The air was dry and cruel, and hunger followed them like a ghost. Sacagawea walked silently, her small frame trembling from exhaustion. She no longer cried, there were no tears left to shed. Around her, the others stumbled forward, their faces empty, their spirits fading. Sometimes she glanced toward the horizon where the sky met the land, endless and unreachable. In that line of light, she imagined her home, her mother's voice, the river's song, the laughter of her village. Those memories were her strength, the invisible fire that kept her feet moving. At night, the group rested briefly beneath the cold stars. The same stars that once shone over her valley now felt distant, almost foreign. But Sacagawea looked up at them every night, whispering silent prayers to the Great Spirit for courage. Though her body was weak, her heart refused to surrender. Somewhere deep inside, she believed this journey was not her end, it was the beginning of something far greater than she could yet understand. The captives finally reached a vast camp surrounded by horses, tents, and smoke rising from dozens of fires. It was unlike anything Sacagawea had ever seen. Warriors laughed and boasted of their victory, showing off the goods they had taken, blankets, weapons, and the frightened captives who now stood trembling before them. The air smelled of sweat, fire, and roasted meat. Drums beat in rhythm as the tribes celebrated their triumph, but to Sacagawea, every sound felt sharp and foreign, echoing like thunder in her chest. She stood close to the other captives, afraid to move or speak. Strange faces surrounded her, tall men with painted skin, women dressed in unfamiliar clothes, and children who stared curiously at her torn garments and frightened eyes. Their language was strange, their laughter unsettling. She felt invisible and exposed all at once. Her heart pounded as she tried to understand what was happening around her. Later that night, as the fires dimmed, Sacagawea sat quietly near a tent, hugging her knees. Around her, people danced and sang songs of victory, their shadows flickering in the orange glow. She listened closely, trying to catch a word, a tone, anything familiar, but there was nothing. Everything in this camp reminded her how far from home she truly was. Yet in her silence, something began to grow, not hatred, not fear, but a quiet strength. Even in this strange place, she promised herself she would survive, no matter what it took. Days passed in the camp of strangers, and Sacagawea began to realize that survival meant more than strength, it meant learning. At first, she stayed quiet, watching everything around her. She noticed how the women moved through their daily work, gathering roots, drying meat, and caring for children. She listened carefully to their words, repeating them softly to herself at night, forming the sounds of a new language. Hunger and fear pushed her to adapt. She understood that to live, she must blend in, become part of this world, even if her heart belonged elsewhere. The days were long and filled with labor. She carried water from the stream, gathered firewood, and helped grind grains. The older women noticed her quiet obedience and calm nature. Some began to treat her with small kindness, a shared piece of bread, a gentle smile, a word of comfort. For the first time since her capture, Sacagawea felt something other than fear. It wasn't happiness, but it was hope, a fragile thread keeping her spirit alive. At night, she lay beside the fire, gazing up at the stars. The same stars that once watched over her home now seemed to follow her here. She whispered her mother's name to them, afraid to forget the sound. Though she was far from the mountains and rivers she loved, Sacagawea's heart remained strong. She was learning not only the language of her captors, but the language of survival, quiet, patient, and enduring as the earth itself. Days turned into weeks, and Sacagawea's life in the new camp slowly began to change. The initial fear that had once frozen her heart was replaced by a quiet awareness. She observed everything, how the women gathered berries, how they tanned hides, and how they prepared food over the open fire. Though she did not understand their words, she watched their movements carefully, learning their ways little by little. Her sharp mind and calm nature did not go unnoticed. A few of the older women began to share food with her and teach her simple words. For the first time since her capture, she felt a small spark of belonging, though her heart still ached for home. One afternoon, a group of fur traders arrived at the camp. They came with goods from faraway places, shiny metal tools, colorful fabrics, and beads that glittered in the sunlight. Among them was a French-Canadian trapper named Toussaint Charbonneau. He was loud, greedy, and always seeking bargains. As he traded goods with the warriors, his eyes noticed Sacagawea. To him, she was not a child but an opportunity. That night, a deal was made, one that would alter the course of her life forever. Sacagawea was traded away like any other possession, her fate sealed with a few items and a handshake. She didn't understand what had happened, only that she was being taken away once again. Yet somewhere deep inside, night had fallen over the endless plains, and the camp was silent except for the faint crackle of dying fires. The warriors slept, the traders rested, and the world seemed still, but Sacagawea lay awake, her eyes fixed on the sky. Above her stretched a sea of stars, bright and endless, the same stars that once watched over her Shoshone homeland. For the first time in many moons, she felt peace, fragile and fleeting, but real. The pain of the long journey, the loss of her family, the fear of the unknown, all seemed to fade as she looked into that glowing sky. She began to hum softly, a tune her mother once sang beside the river. It was a song of courage, of home, of the spirit that never dies. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried far into the quiet night, rising and falling with the wind. Tears welled in her eyes, not of weakness, but of remembrance. She was no longer the child who played by the water, she was a survivor, a traveler of fate. As the stars shimmered above, Sacagawea made a silent promise: she would live, she would endure, and one day, she would see her mountains again. The camera lingers on her face, calm, determined, illuminated by the last flicker of firelight. The scene fades slowly into darkness, leaving only her song echoing softly, like a whisper of destiny carried across the plains. He felt that her journey was far from over, it was only beginning.